First of all, I'm here to present my art and science research project from the background of an artist. I'm an artist, I'm not a scientist, but I collaborated often with scientists, and especially in this project. All the projects that I run were multidisciplinary, focusing on art, ecology, technology, most of all. But the Intelligent Beehive project is started in 2008, more or less. Yeah, from the moment that we were running or submitting, let's say, a European project, which was called a lot of, the acronym a lot of, for a laboratory on the open fields. In this project, we were asking ourselves, like, which approach can we take for this cultural EU project to be a bit different from other projects, art projects. So we thought, like, okay, we have a little garden at our studio. I'm speaking now in the times of OCNO. OCNO, an artist-run organization. We were like working with some 10 core artists, engineers, computer scientists, and then with a lot of people that came on and off. And we decided to work only on the open field in our little rooftop garden, but also in our partners' countries in the open fields. So how can art change when you work only on the open fields, mostly with technology? I mean, and we don't have a van, a nice van with a lot of stuff in it. It's all do it yourself. So we wanted to research, like, which kind of projects pop up, how do they develop, and how do you work as an artist with technology in the open field? Okay, this was the given. In the meantime, you read this quote, and it's said to be said by Einstein, but some people say that it was not by him, but anyways, it's the truth, and it's very dangerous. So, in this context of the open field, the bee thing popped up. First of all, because there were problems with the bees disappearing, but secondly, because I got in contact with some beekeepers, and I was immediately obsessed by these animals. Like, I was so fascinated, like, how do they organize, how do they build their camp, how do they do these things of democratic decision making when they go swarming and they are searching for a new home. So studying a bee colony is very enrichable for humans also. I connected to even more people from the universities and so on, and we decided to build some observation beehives to study the bees, and in the meantime make artworks with it. And that's what I'm gonna do in this talk, like showing you as well the research side, bottom up, in these artist collectives, as the results, the artistic results that came out of this research, and with the installations made with results, how we try to take awareness with the general public. So the Urban Bee Lab itself was focusing on new bee monitoring devices for gathering data in a non-intrusive way, and then collaborating with scientists to analyze this data and learn something from it, and then making artworks with it to sensitize the general public and to raise awareness about the status of the environment and the decline of the bees. So first of all, I tell a bit about the laboratory on the open fields, which is our open air lab. This one is in the center of Brussels. It's on the rooftop of a parking lot. It's on the 6th floor, and it's a rooftop of 2,000 square meters, from which we turned more or less 700 square meters into a rooftop garden with partly a food forest, and that's the part that you see. Behind the food forest, there is more another part with more herbs and some kind of Mediterranean garden. Because these rooftops, this is also part of the research project, actually. I started it in 2009, this rooftop. It turned out to be the Mediterranean plants that grow the best on these rooftops, because the climatological things are so extreme that you can compare it more to a Mediterranean climate, so more sun, more wind, less rain, and so on, than to a Belgian climate, unless the climate in Belgium is now changing also. In this rooftop garden, we have a lot of research projects and research facilities, all do-it-yourself, like the greenhouse in which we run some projects, the apiary, which comes later a lot, then the herb garden, the wildflower garden, that are put in databases, the pioneering plants. I have a lot of databases, and I collect all information and, over the years. We ran also a few projects with community gardening, on which I can maybe answer some questions later. I mean, in the sense of like, how does a community work there? Because there are a lot of positive sides, but also a lot of negative sides. Anyways, now the urban garden or the vegetable garden is gone, and it became a food forest that is self-sufficient and doesn't need a lot of human input anymore. An artwork that came out of this open-air laboratory or garden, rooftop garden, was 2 years ago in an exhibition called the Green Light District on urban ecology in Belgium, in Kortrijk. And they asked me to do some kind of reproduction, reenactment of this open-air laboratory. I said, like, this is nearly impossible, and I don't want to do it on the rooftop because I don't want to become a landscape architect. That's not my role. If I do this, I want to put like a point and to show the people a critical approach. And then I got a 250 square meter floor in an old factory where I recreated a part of the rooftop garden. So with 50 tons of soil and everything. This is a simulation, but this is the real thing. So there was a huge blackboard for participation of the public. There were tours every day, but when there was nobody, people could leave some messages or questions on the blackboard that were answered then. And in the garden, there were sensors everywhere for temperature, humidity, all this kind of stuff, webcams, and they were streamed online continuously. There you see the streaming module. I also had a simulation of the beehives, not the real bees. Unfortunately, this was not allowed because it was an inside exhibition, and it was in winter also. But in this little beehive, I put movies that I recorded in my real beehives. In real time. Yeah, the first observation devices started at OCNO, at our artists collaborative, which also has a small garden and small rooftop garden with some beehives. So we were a collection of computer scientists, mostly artists and some engineers, and then we started to think like, what can we monitor in these bees and how can we bring it out later in exhibitions? So which technology can we use? Because this was all even before the Fab Labs. It was in 2008, 2009, or there were already Fab Labs, but they were not really common yet. So we were thinking about some kind of laser technology to scan the bees and of course, cameras and microphones, all this kind of stuff. But it's easy to think about it. It's not so easy to make it, well, in the do-it-yourself anyways. So everything started from this African beehive that we made. This beehive was so productive. I put a bee colony in it in the beginning, and we never took any honey, we never took the bees out of it, and every year they produced at least 1 or 2 swarms, from which we started all our other colonies. So you see, this is a window. Well, it's not open now, but it's a window where you can control the bees, and they really like this type of beehive, which is very common in Africa, in Kenya. It's a Kenyan beehive, because it also reproduces like the inside of a bee, of a tree, more or less. Yeah, when we made this beehive, we had the intention to put already the laser technology that acted as a scan to scan the bees, but the bees were too fast, and we got a swarm from someone, and we had to put a swarm in the beehive before the technology was finished. But afterwards, we were prepared. So we started, our schedule was every winter, the winter months, and winter, I mean, the bee season is over at the end of summer, so you have autumn and winter to work on a new setup of new beehive with new technology, or to make the technology better. And then we had to be ready in March with a new thing. So this is one of the winter months, working with Arduinos, Raspberry Pis later. Here is still Arduino. I think I don't know which shield this was, like another one before the Raspberry Pi. And anyways, this was the outline of our first bee observation device with temperature and humidity sensors. This was the easy thing, but then with infrared cameras. And everything was running on Linux. It was not yet with Raspberry. A small Linux computer was in the top of the beehive, and the cameras were connected to it, and the sensors were connected to the Arduino, and then everything was connected in streaming to a computer that was inside our office. I'm speaking now about a distance of 10 meters that we were covering, so everything was with cables to be sure that all the data, that there were no problems of dropping out stuff and so on. And this was the thing. So it worked fantastic, it worked well. Inside you see a plexiglass, which is in the middle of the beehive, actually, with 2 infrared cameras that we hacked from 2 webcams, and we modified the lens, and they were pointing to the 2 sides, and we put in the swarm. The swarm came from the African beehive. They were swarming. You see, they were already gathering together under this little garden table, inspired by Buckminster Fuller, which was another workshop that we did. And then, so we took the swarm and we put it in the green beehive, how it was called, and it went very well. They started building. That's the 2 webcams here. Here you see the swarm that was put inside. In the beginning, they are like a ball, half of a ball, a sphere, actually, half a sphere hanging on top of the ceiling. And then slowly they start to search in the beehive, to get accustomed with it. And then they start building at one side. And here you see them like going open, the ball is going open, And then they started to build at one site. And this was the computer that was inside our studio, which we modified for 4 screens. It was actually also a thing that we used for other installation setups and so on. But now we dedicated it completely to this project of the Green Beehive. And on 4 screens, we had continuously the information of the beehive. And then we started to work on the data that we gathered. And on some of the screens, you saw the data information. Well, this was a printed one, but in processing, we had then the data in real time that were shown together with the live images of the bees. And this was also online, and it was recorded. And this was in the year 2010, 2011, which was like for working with no money, already a big deal. Then we ran some other projects also in the beehives, like a lot of the artists connected to OCNO are busy with sound. And a lot of people put microphones in the beehive, different kinds of microphones and so on. This was one of the most obvious things, just via the top cover, put like a microphone in it, an electret microphone. But then there is a contact microphone at the entrance and so on. That's again the Green Beehive. You see that they started building from one side. There you see the audio technology because it had to be amplified as it was a contact microphone and so on. So this was the first bee device that we built, and it took us the most of our time. Like, let's say that it ran over 2 years. We recorded at 15 images a second during 10 months. So we had gigabytes of data, of material, and from this information we compressed it then in a movie of 12 hours, the 10 months in 12 hours, which is still very long. That's the one that I showed in this little square box in the exhibition of the Green Light District. And I show it still, like, yeah, of course, the bees are still the bees, and they act still the same. The transparent beehive is another project that we presented during whole bee season in another room of our studio setup. This one was inspired by this design of François Hubert, who was a Swiss entomologist, naturalist, living around 1800 and working a lot with bees and doing a lot of discoveries on bees. For example, he was the one that could prove that the queen was a queen and not a king, and that the queen was mating outside of the beehive with a drone and not inside the beehive, and so on. And on top of that, he was blind, so it was incredible how he did all this with the help of assistants and so on, his sons, his wife, and so on. But so one of his observation devices was the book beehive. And I thought this is such a nice idea, a beehive as a book, and that you turn the leaves and you read the life of the colony as you read in a book. That I wanted to duplicate it, but then in a contemporary way. And that's how we came to the transparent beehive. So instead of having the leaves of a book, we thought of having the shelves, the rolling shelves of a library. And we put the frames in a vertical way instead of horizontal, and we put them on sliders so that we could easily open them to inspect and to see what the bees were doing. And then we put a second cover around it. So actually the actual beehive is the one in the middle with the wooden frames covered by aluminium. And there you see at the bottom, you see holes where the bees can get in. There was plexiglass at the front and at the back. And then there was a second plexiglass box around it, because the bees, they came in and out via this plexiglass tube through the window. And then they came in the big box, and then they could go into the small box via the holes. And in the wooden frames here were a lot of contact microphones, which were recording the sound of the bees. Well, actually, this whole beehive was acting as a box, as a loudspeaker. When it got fuller, when the colony was expanding, and when it got fuller with wax and with bees, the sound was changing. So we streamed we broadcasted the sound in real time, and it was slowly over time changing. But that project was visited by a lot of people, whatever, schools, other people. It was part of festivals. People, it's incredible because people, they don't know how a colony works. They are so surprised when they see a bee colony from very close, and they get more sensitized to the problems of the bees when you can give a little bit of explanation. So here, the project design of this beehive was built along the open structure philosophy, which is also part of the maker movement. It was set up by a Belgian designer, Thomas Lomé, and it works along a grid. The grid is all sizes of multiples of 1 centimeter, and the idea was to work in design as you work like in open source with the code, but then work with the hardware, and that it's interchangeable, so no glue, only things that you can take apart, parts that you can use for new structures and so on. And they have a huge database of elements where you can download designs or parts of designs. You can upload your designs and so on. It's very well worked out. It's openstructures.net. Here you see the amplifiers on top of the frames and the bees coming in via the tube. Yeah, that's through the tube. But here you see how they are like feeling fine with this technology. They are very curious, like inspecting everything, putting propolis on everything, like trying to close it down. But it continued to work. So this was like also research, how will they behave, how will they take it that they are in a strange environment, but apparently this was not really a problem. And then later the beehive was like, before the winter I put the bees in a real beehive then, because it was not good to leave them in that one. And then the beehive was exhibited in a lot of festivals with the sounds that was played, and with the movies there of the bees going through the tube, because everything was also streamed constantly and recorded. Then the next one is the open source beehives and the sound beehive. So then I got in contact with the Fab Lab in Barcelona because I was invited to do a workshop there on bee monitoring. I met the people of the Fab Lab, and we decided to continue the project together. In the meantime, I was working with Waré beehives, which is some type of ecological beehives, because you put the empty boxes under the brood nest instead of on top, so that the bees, they decide themselves when the colony gets bigger. And when they go down, in a regular beehive, you put empty boxes on top, and the bees, they cannot stand an empty box on top of their brood nest, so they try to fill it as fast as possible. That's, of course, what the commercial beekeepers want, because they fill it with honey. And, but that way you can also stress the bees. In this Waré beehive, which is, again, invented by like a monk in around 1900 this time. The monks have a big deal in beekeeping. They had a lot of time and they had these gardens at the monasteries and so on. So this Waré beehive, we updated it with a grid of the open structures and along the sizes of the open structures. And we perfectionalized the design a little bit, and then, yeah, you see the exploded view here, and we try to make it so that it was able to be cut out of one sheet of wood. And then we put the designs online, and we started a crowdfunding campaign. Well, I got out of it because I didn't have time to be busy with these things, but it was mostly run by the people of the Fab Lab, and they finalized the crowdfunding campaign, and then we were using the money to develop the sensors, to perfectionalize the sensors in the beehive. So here you see the small model of the Waré beehive. And here we were installing it outside in Barcelona in the Green Fab Lab. And this is one of the devices, the bee shield, that were developed, but it was actually never used because it was never completely finished, this one. But it had to go together with a smart citizen project that the Fab Lab Barcelona is busy with since a very long time. And the purpose was to put all these beehives, to put this smart citizen with a bee shield in the beehives and in several beehives around Barcelona, and then send data because the smart citizen had much more than only the things that we wanted to take from the beehive. Also temperature outside, humidity, temperature inside, humidity inside, but also air pollution, sound, and all this kind of stuff. And to put it also online, let's say actually in a better way and in a more networked way, the things that we were busy with in Brussels already. This is again an artistic visualization of this networked beehive information data stuff. This is in an exhibition in Riga, and it's a network of beehives in Brussels, not in one apiary, but over the city. In the background you have the map, stylized map of Brussels. And so in this Riga exhibition, I was streaming in real time the data that came from different beehives in Brussels that had these sensors and this material in it. And the people could see how the different beehives were behaving. This is an image of the apiary in the rooftop garden, the big rooftop garden, not the Okno one. There you see how the beehives are, like how the technology is in the beehives. The Waré beehive, another Waré beehive, they all have sensors of temperature, humidity, inside, outside, because the relation to the environment is extremely important. Yeah, this whole relation to the environment, and especially to the urban environment in our case, is extremely important. It's not only about the bees, but it's also about, yeah, how is the city behaving, the pollution, the flowers, so we started to make pollen databases and all this kind of stuff. It's a big whole. It's not like one little part. It's really the whole that we tried to cover. So this one, I called it the sound beehive because in the top it had 4 electret microphones, and then in the regular frames it had some contact microphones, and then there to the side you see cameras that were pointing inside, infrared cameras. This cameras is a very tricky thing. We put a lot of time in working with the cameras actually, technically then, and yeah, this is a bit of messy technology. that is in the boxes. It's all off-the-shelf technology because we were only able to work with the cheap technology, but this was also the challenge, of course, to work with this kind of stuff. When we were working then for data analysis with scientists, they said like, okay, you're crazy, it's not calibrated, your stuff, your data are like, what can we do with the data that are not calibrated? If we want to build a beehive, it should be more calibrated and this and that. But some scientists were open to it. And anyways, we did some sound analysis with some people from the artificial intelligence lab on sound. But here is also like trying to make a three-dimensional system with 64 temperature sensors spread in 3 dimensions in the beehive. This was a very complex thing as well at the side of the technology with this multiplexing stuff and so on, but this is not my task, but my task was like how to put the sensors in this frame in the beehive, every frame had 8 sensors, and we had 8 frames, so 8 times 8, 64, 64 thermistors. And yeah, it was also in this beehive that we had this. There you see another infrared camera pointing down, you know. And then this is an analysis that we made then with Max MSP of the bees at the entrance. And yeah, the audio analysis. And then this was put into some artistic rendering, let's say, of the data for being presented in exhibitions. Here, at each time we presented, we were able to present 2 moments, 2 days, the one next to the other. We could take whatever day out of the database, winter, summer, yesterday and the day after, or things like that. And we could choose also from different sensors and sensor data. In this image, we have like the 4 wheels, and each of the wheel represented audio brightness in becoming more blue or more white relative to the brightness in the audio analysis. Then the hive temperature was represented by the simulation of the dots that simulated the colony turning around their own center point, faster or slower. And then the third thing, the motion tracking, was what we kept with the camera outside on the flight platform when the bees go in and out. So at a specific point, it passed the threshold, and then these wheels were turning so fast, changing color, white from blue to white, and then the dots were spreading out completely, and then you see that the most active moment of the day. So it was good to compare in a visual way the data and in a comprehensive way for a general public that is not used to read data. And then it was, for example, presented like this, some kind of monitoring setup in an exhibition. There you had the huge beehive, the huge soirée at the bottom, where people could go and stand in the beehive with their head. Now it's a little girl that is standing in it, but normally the person comes higher. And there was like 8 speakers in this top, and the people were with their head inside of the box, of a bee box, having this bee sound all around their head. And then at the same time, you had this wall with different screens with information that was filmed inside the beehive, as on the top, then the bees coming through the window, all these things. It was sometimes, for some people, it was a bit scary. But it gave a very good feeling on how it is when you're close to the bees, close working with the bees, this sound, this buzzing sound that you have all the time. This was presented, for example, in Buenos Aires in an exhibition on artificial intelligence. This is the last project I'm working on now, the intelligent guerrilla beehive, which will also be presented here in the exhibition, in the SciArt exhibition that is coming up. It's completely different in the way that here the inspiration comes mainly from biology. And as I was saying before, I started with the pollen database. And for this pollen database, I wanted to be sure on which flowers the bees were foraging, my bees were foraging. So I collected pollen in the beehives that I had control over. And I collected at the same day pollen in the environment close to the beehive, at the flowers, immediately on the flowers. And then I had a collaboration with the University in Brussels, the VUB, to work on their scanning electron microscope, and we made SEM pictures of all this pollen and so on. This, for example, is a SEM picture of a wild strawberry pollen. And this inspired me, the form of this pollen inspired me to start with this mobile beehive that is like a backpack, could be used as a backpack. So the idea was like, okay, there are so many swarms, bee swarms, every year in the city. Where do they go to? They go to the chimneys, they go to unhealthy places, and so on. So I wanted to give, to make mobile beehives that you can stick to the wall of a building, hang in a tree, just to offer the bees new homes. And homes that are inspired on their needs and that are not inspired on the needs of a beekeeper, like a square box with loose frames that you easily can take out to take the honey and so on. This is made for the bees. You don't take the honey, you just work with the ideal volume that they prefer. I based the sizes on papers, mainly by Thomas Seeley, an American entomologist, who did a lot of research on bee homes, on inhabited islands, working with all kinds of forms, directions, heights, and so on. So with this data, I started to develop this mobile guerrilla beehive. This is how far I am now. That's the beehive, how it is now. And after a lot of detours, because it's already 2 years that I'm working on it, and in the beginning it was a project with much more green technology. Green in the sense I was talking before about it, like it was based on microbial fuel cells that were fed by the debris of the beehive, that bees, wax, propolis, other stuff that falls via the bottom platform of the beehive in the microbial fuel cell. But unfortunately, we submitted this project twice as a FET project. It was never accepted. And then I decided to work on it myself and with people that wanted to help me. But this was more Fab Lab people instead of scientists. And this one was mainly developed in a project made at Europe, a European project in the Fab Lab in Barcelona. So the idea with this one is, it's the form of the strawberry. It's still the backpack. You can put it anywhere, but we work with bacteria. In this skin, which is a skin that is already grown by bacteria and by yeast cells. It's a byproduct of a fermentation process. This skin envelops a skeleton that will be printed in chitin. Chitin is a material that you can find in all animals that have an exoskeleton. Like insects also have an exoskeleton, so the bees, they also have chitin, or shrimps, or lobsters, or this kind of stuff. So with the chitin, you can 3D print. There is still a lot of research to do, but for example, at MIT, in the section of material science, they are already very far with it, but before we will be able to really 3D print in full 3D, it still needs a lot of more development, mixing with other products and so on, but now you can already print in 2D with it in a good way. So the idea is to have a skeleton in chitin enveloped with this material of a bacteria. It's a microbial skin. It's vegetal leather, it's called also. And on top of this vegetal leather, another biofilm with bacteria that can sense the pollution of the environment. And if they pass a threshold of pollution, then the bacteria, they change color and they will tattoo the beehive in a way. So this is how the skin is grown, the fermentation process. You see there the skin hanging in the grow medium. At the right, we have a SEM photograph of the tip of the tongue of a bee. And there you see the size of the pollen, for example, the inspiration for the form. This is the bacteria, it's Acetobacter bacteria and yeast cells that are at the basis of this process of fermentation and cellulose skin growing. And here we are hunting for bacteria that are good to work with for our biofilm, to visualize the environmental pollution. This is also at the Green Fab Lab in Barcelona. It's in a natural park. And there we have the Waré beehive with the solar panel. We put these skins in the beehive, around the beehive and so on, and we try then to culture and to make tissue culture of the bacteria that were attached to the skin and to isolate colonies of bacteria and to multiply them in the petri dish. And here you can see that they change colors. That's a Lactobacillus plantarum. That's a very regular bacteria that you find in a lot of milk products. But we also worked with the Deinococcus radiophilus, which is a more environmental one. And here you see a skin stained by the bacteria, there where it becomes green. And that's a very thin skin. But here you see the skeleton in 3D, and then a printed one. And this printed one will be enveloped then with the skin. That's the chitin, for example. That's a test with the chitin, very thin in 2D, but that's how it looks like. It looks a bit like a caramel kind of stuff. And the rotative experiment, which will also be shown here in the exhibition, but in a better setup, more, this is very much do-it-yourself. This was a first try. So here we grow the skin immediately around an object. The object is turning in the growth medium, and slowly, day by day, the skin is becoming thicker and thicker. And then we inoculate this wet skin with the bacteria, and it becomes like this. That's how far we are for now. And now you can ask me questions if you have some.